Here. And today we're going to talk about the alchemy of desires and values in sovereign submission. So, one of the patterns that I notice a lot in observing other submissive men and just observing the way the community talks about submission and everything else is that we talk a lot about desires. What I don't see talked about nearly as much are values. And I think it's really important that in order for us to operate from a place of sovereignty in our life and be able to make conscious choices around the desire for submission, that we have a fundamental understanding of our values and how those values connect with and are expressed through our desires. When I see that a man is talking a lot about his desires but doesn't have a clear sense of his values, that tells me that he's in dangerous territory. Because without having that fundamental orientation within himself around his values, he's going to let his desires lead him astray at some point. And let's be clear here, I say this as somebody who's been part of that club. I'm not pointing fingers without recognizing that I'm pointing some back. It's really important to understand and recognize this, because when we live a life where we are not oriented to the values that we have, what will happen is that we will get caught up in our desires and let those desires lead us into situations that can be dangerous. And not dangerous in a fun way, but dangerous in a way that could be financially exploitive, could be emotionally damaging, even potentially physically damaging. And again, I say this from experience because I had a couple of experiences where all of those things happened. And here's the thing, I'm not putting it all on the other person. I fully take responsibility for the fact that I made certain choices and that I operated from a place where I was thinking with the little head instead of the big head, where I was letting my desires lead me instead of leading my desires. Now, the irony of all this, of course, is that, I'm saying this to submissive men. And it may sound like, well, okay, like you're saying this, and like, if I'm supposed to lead my desires, like, doesn't that run counter to submission? And what I would share with you is that if anything, we truly cannot submit until we learn to be the sovereign in our lives. This is one of the reasons why I call this Substack and everything I share and the business that I'm creating around this sovereign submission. Because a man who is submissive needs to be strong enough to be the sovereign in his life and wise enough to kneel to her leadership. But part of that wisdom is found by fundamentally understanding what he wants and needs and desires, and balancing that with an understanding of the core values that operate through his life. Welcome, Nora. Glad to have you here. And if any of you are on here who have questions or comments or anything like that, feel free to drop this in the chat. I do keep an eye on it, and I always respond. So when I talk about this, the alchemy of desire and value, what I'm really talking about is coming to this finely led understanding, this finely tuned understanding about like what you actually want for yourself. And not only what do you want for yourself, but where does that fit within the way that you live your life? And as a sovereign man, necessarily, you need to be able to look at your desires and say, I understand that I want this thing. And I also have the necessary awareness so that I can look at what I want and choose from a place of autonomy and sovereignty, and that I will vet the people that come into my life that I may surrender to. One of the mistakes that I see, and again, this is something I've done, so I'm not by any means just pointing fingers at anyone else, but one of the mistakes that I see a lot of men do is they rush into relationships. They get caught up in that heady swirl of new relationship energy, and they think to themselves, I finally found her. I found the one, or maybe I found one of the ones, depending on like what your orientation is, because you may have multiple relationships. And so they rush into the relationship because they're like, oh my gosh, I found what I want. I can finally find this person, and it's going to be amazing. I'm going to have everything I want with this person. They're going to use me as furniture. They're going to peg me. They're going to do all the other different things that I want them to do, whatever it is your submissive desires are, or they're going to demand that I be of service and all these other things. And lo and behold, that little head gets really excited, even if it's caged. And what you've done is you've lost all objectivity. And then suddenly you look down the line and you're paying for a hot tub, or you've bought something else for this person, or whatever else, and you're left feeling taken advantage of, and you're like, what happened here? Well, first, my heart goes out to you if any of that's happened, because again, that's something that's happened to me. And secondly, this is one of the reasons why I work with submissive men. Because in order to truly submit, we must step into our sovereignty. This is something I'm going to be talking about a lot in the time to come. A submissive man who is not in his sovereignty has no business getting into a relationship, because he doesn't know himself. He doesn't know himself well enough to orient himself to the innermost values that are going to keep him on the right track in his life and allow him to fully serve her with dedication and commitment. And she deserves that. She's not going to get it from somebody who doesn't know himself and hasn't done the emotional labor and work that needs to happen. To truly be a submissive man requires a level of discipline and awareness and purpose that goes beyond what an average man experiences. Because submission is ultimately the choice to surrender control, to trust in her guidance. But a man who isn't sovereign in his life isn't going to know how to recognize when he needs to surrender control and who he can surrender to control to with that feeling of absolute trust. Welcome, Aiden. Glad to have you here. So with sovereign submission, we look at the alchemy of desire and value very carefully. Yes, you have these desires. Yes, they are wonderful to experience and express. And we also have the core value of responsibility. Who am I responsible for? Who am I responsible to? Well, first and foremost, you're responsible to yourself. Yes, you heard that right. You are responsible to yourself. You really can't be responsible with anyone else until you learn to be responsible with yourself. Another way that I like to say this is you need to learn to choose yourself. I know, this may sound like a contradiction to the whole concept of submission. Yet let me assure you, it is not. Choosing yourself can truly mean choosing submission. But one of the most fundamental truths that we need to sit with and recognize is that if we are going to truly choose somebody else and to submit to them, we have to learn how to choose ourselves. When a man has not done the work to choose himself, he's not ready for submission. Because here's what he hasn't done. He hasn't done the emotional labor to get to know himself and get clear on who he is and what he wants and what he longs for. He hasn't taken the time to look at his codependent behavior patterns. And I guarantee that anyone who is a submissive man has codependent behavior patterns. This isn't a judgment, folks, either. This is just the result of likely that man was raised in an environment where he had to be a people pleaser to get by and survive. And I say this from experience because that was the experience that I had. Being able to differentiate between codependent people pleasing, nice guy behaviors, or what I call nice guy submission in this case, and genuine and real connection requires a level of awareness that is not going to be found without taking some time to do the deep inner work that comes with this. Submissive man also needs to choose himself in other ways. One of the things that I have explored in my own life is what are all the ways that I've abandoned myself? How have I abandoned myself when it's come to diet? How have I abandoned myself when it's come to physical exercise? How have I abandoned myself spiritually? Because if we don't understand where we have abandoned ourselves, then what we also don't understand is where we need to find the central values that orient ourselves to the most important part of our lives. And so, when you have a submissive man and he's like, oh, I found my mistress, I found the one, or the more than one, or whatever. Great. Have you done the work on yourself so that as you get to know her, you actually spend some time really vetting her? And I'm going to share a story here. The previous relationship that I got into is a perfect example of this. I met someone. First date I went on with her, my intuition flat out said, do not date this person. What did I do? I disregarded because, hey, I had found somebody who seemed to fit. She practiced magic like I did. She was kinky. She was a fairly interesting person. And hey, she was hot, right? How many guys do things because, hey, she was hot? Let's just own it, gentlemen. And, we started to get to know each other. But I ignored red flags. I ignored red flags that were there from the beginning. A few months later, she moves into my house. And the moment I knew that I was really in danger was the time that I came back home from Kung Fu. And she had grabbed one of the statues in my home and broken it. And when I saw that she was willing to do physical violence to something in my home that was important to me, that's when I realized she was willing to do physical violence to me, and not in a sadomasochistic way, but in a way that could be really abusive, and harmful. It took me a while to get out of that relationship. And not a day went by that I felt safe in my own home. I share that with you because what I don't want to see is another submissive man go through that kind of situation, or go through a situation where they're financially taken advantage of. Don't get me wrong, I don't have anything against Vendom, but let's be consciously aware of what we are committing to and choosing. And let's know when we can put the brakes on. This is part of being sovereign. And yes, even in a submissive dynamic, you get and must necessarily maintain the choice to be sovereign. You get to say no. You get to put the brakes on. And maybe in your heart of hearts, what you really want is you ultimately want to get to a place where you're with somebody and she guides your life and everything else and all that. And yet I can guarantee you that there is no woman alive who wants to be with a man who's going to let himself be walked all over all the time. She wants to know that if he's going to be walked over, it's all over. It's only going to be by her. and that he has a backbone, and that he will stand up for himself even with her when necessary. You want her to respect you. If there's no respect there, that relationship will not last. Something that I think is really applicable to BDSM is that, like, basically, BDSM is a vanilla relationship in hard mode. Yes, it has the kinky fun. It also has the extra conversations and all the necessary work that both people need to do, especially because we're dealing with things where like somebody could physically, hurt somebody. And okay, like I'm spanking you, that's fun. But then, like, all of a sudden, if they rear back and they're like, I'm gonna fucking hit you as hard as I can, and you're not ready for it, like, that turns into the territory of harm and abuse. These are the kinds of nuances that we need to be thinking about as we explore our relationship dynamics. And this is why it's so important to have a central understanding of our values. Now, I'm going to pop a link into here. And on April 5th, oh, that's not quite what I want to grab. Hold on here for a second. On April 5th, I am teaching, or I am starting up a 14-day cohort called the Sovereign Code. And this is a 14-day journey where we're going to spend some time defining the values in your life and building a foundation to support you in your sovereignty so that you can kneel to her in submission with the full presence that she deserves and with the full awareness that you deserve. This program is for you whether you're a sub-curious man who's kind of like, I'm curious about submission, or you're a man who's like, yeah, I'm submissive, but I'm not in a dynamic, or you're in a man who isn't a dynamic. What I really want you to understand is that you are worth it. You are worth it. You deserve to take care of yourself and to respect yourself and trust yourself. And that doesn't happen without putting in the reps. And it's really important because the difference between unhealthy submission and healthy submission is a very fine point. And this isn't something that's really spoken to as much as it needs to be in some ways, and certainly not spoken to as much in the submissive men's community. And here's the thing. When you join this container, you're going to be with other men like me, and there's going to be no judgment there. What there is support. There is the fundamental recognition that, hey, we've got each other in brotherhood, and that we understand each other, because the honest truth is there is really not a space for submissive men in the men's work world that fully understands or recognizes their unique journey. And that's one of the reasons why I have come up with Sovereign Submission, because I want to serve my fellow submissive men and give them that safe space and that place where they can go and do the deep inner work. And they can do it with somebody who isn't going to say to them, you must lead in your relationships. We don't have to lead in our relationships. Guess what? We don't have to. Now, we may need to lead in certain areas of our lives, but even in that, it's not us taking the reins from our mistress. It's saying, like, okay, when I go into work, I'm not going to kneel to my boss. I'm going to treat myself. I'm going to have a backbone and I'm going to speak up. Or when I'm out in public and out and about and somebody, comes up to me, I'm not just going to, go along with what they want. I'm going to speak up for myself. Like, that's a real thing. That's important to do. And there is real strength in being able to understand, like, who you are and what you are, and be able to live your life on your own terms, which still includes being able to kneel to your mistress. And that's one of the reasons why I've created this community, because my mission is to serve those submissive men who need it, to give them the support they need, to show them that they are not alone, and that there's no need to carry any shame or guilt around their desires. That if anything, we can shed that, we can explore how to let that go. And that we can show that we can do the necessary emotional regulation and labor and work, so that when we go into a submissive dynamic, we can fully kneel in her presence and give her our full attention in a way that she deserves, in a way that fully honors her. So if this is something that appeals to you and calls to you, check out the link in the chat here for those live or below in the show notes and join the Sovereign Code. We're starting our first cohort on April 5th, and I'd really love for you to be there. And regardless of whether you come now or at some point down the line, here's the thing that I want you to recognize. You are valuable in and of yourself. You have value in and of yourself. And when you take the time to create a sovereign foundation, that foundation will support you every day the rest of your life, whether or not you are in a relationship at the time or not. And it will help you make wiser choices because you're not just operating from your desire, you're operating from your values as well. And you're finding a way to balance both the desire and the values in order to truly create a powerful and amazing and rich life. All right. Thank you so much for being here. And again, if the Sovereign Code calls to you, I hope to see you in the cohort, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.